Alright, in this annotated game, we're going to be taking a look at a hybrid opening by Black. So I start off with the English, and my opponent starts with the Dutch. And normally the Dutch is going to fall into a handful of categories, where we could have the Leningrad, which is going to be a G6, D6 structure typically, the classical or Ilan-Zavensky, which is normally bishop e7, d6, and you play for like queen e8, queen h5 ideas after castling. You'll have the Stonewall, which will be d5, c6, and then the more hybrid systems, which players are trying to kind of backdoor into like a Queen's Indian defense with b6, where they already have this pawn extension with f5. Well, one of the things about my move order that I'm using, I'm not allowing bishop b4 with an attack on my king or on the knight on c3. So I have a bit more flexibility with using this structure with playing d4 now, because that bishop would just be hitting air. And now my opponent played a line that was interesting, and I wanted to cover it because this is a very, very rare position. I played it wrong. The game ended up being interesting for something in the middle game later, and I just wanted to cover it on the channel. So an idea of how this could typically go, which if a5, knight a6, bishop e7, etc., the engine liked bishop g5 first and foremost. Now I found this interesting because typically you don't want to give up a bishop pair in the open position, but then the machine has the follow-up of, you cannot stop my plan with e4. And once we reach here, it just likes the flexibility with rook e3. You have follow-up ideas to double rooks on the e-file after moving the queen out of the way. White has a space advantage, and no matter how Black makes contact with the pawns, we're going to be able to attack and add some pressure there. So, in the main game, my opponent played g6. And I know in a lot of these positions, you're supposed to play d5 in order to shut down this bishop. And normally you want to go knight d4. So I'm just kind of on autopilot here. I go knight c3, and I think since g6 has been played, my opponent's not going to commit to here. And if he does, I'm going to go bishop g5. And I feel like the dark square holes are going to be a big problem. So bishop g7, I go with a typical plan. Now it's a question of, I went with knight d4, which is a mistake here. So I think this is a good learning moment. What is the best plan for white? And don't give me a move, give me a series of moves that is going to complete development as much as possible. So if you want to take your time here, here's a good point to pause the video, but otherwise, I'm going to keep going. So the starting move is rook b1. We've shut down one bishop, but the strength of the dark square bishop on this long diagonal, if you start pushing the b pawn, say, the rook would still be on a1. So this is just a nice prophylactic move to say, I'd like to play b4, and I don't want to have to worry about any potential discover tactics later on the rook. a5, prophylaxis against that expansion idea with b4. So I'm going to go a3. We're going to force through b4 and take away a forward square of this knight, kind of keeping Black's pieces awkward. Black's running out of natural moves here. So queen e7, queen b3 with an x-ray if the pawn structure starts to change on the king. And now knight e8, and then another potential x-ray, and you can see where already White has a solid plus in the position and is pressing. This is like +2. But in the main game, my move immediately allows Black to gain a tempo and some space, and then kick my pieces around, and this is roughly equal after d6. So understanding this structure a bit better, because I've played King's Indian with both colors for many years, Black has the space in the center and on the king side very easily. I don't need to be playing over there. It's going to make my situation worse and accelerate his attack. So I need to play on the queen side. My opponent plays directly against this idea. Now, how can I make the most out of this? Because if you go b5, you have killed all counterplay on the queen side. You're not going to be able to make work anything over there. And they're just going to go knight d7, knight c5 after b5. And it's a one-sided game where black more than likely has a big edge there. It's very easy after, say, b5, knight d7, knight c5, bishop c8, and then you just start the attack and go all out. A very clean and easy plan for black. So I go knight c2, takes, and on knight bd7, I don't want to rush to play knight c6. a4 first. If in the long term I can accomplish a5, I get rid of the ISO, and I'm making the pawn structure weaker. So I'm going to play for this plan, and this pawn structure pops up in the bayonet attack of the classical King's Indian. So I'm using the same kind of themes I'm borrowing that I'm going to make a5 work. That's my plan. So knight c5, Bubba 2. And only now do I like knight c6 as just a bone of the throat piece, and I'm keeping an eye on that ever important a5 break square. My opponent elects to give up the bishop pair. Queen runs. I'm like, ooh, okay. Another tempo, thank you. We take those. And now back to the plan. If black takes, that's going to be a big no-no. And I want the break on a5, especially now that I have a knight on d5 already hitting the base pawn. If my bishop could get to a5 as well, that's going to be beautiful coordination to hit the pawn structure. So bishop c3, a5. Don't want to take. Ooh, got to keep the bishop. And I even considered like taking everything on c5 here and giving up the rook for a knight. But I saw this idea here. Queen a1. Now, this is a good pause your video and evaluate, was this a mistake? Because knight b3 can be played. Now, objectively evaluate this position. What do you think first, say, the engine thinks about it? Then, it's like, what do you think the plan is for both sides? Because it's important to understand these types of positions, especially if I elect to give up my queen. And just for my edification, I'm going to go ahead and turn on the engine here. All right, I've got that number as it's... Okay, we're at depth 30. All right, so let's first test the number in your mind from this position. Did you think white was better or black was better? Because the engine has white at nearly +5 after knight b3. So let's see how this went down. I took, allowing the capture of my queen. So I get activity and a rook and knight for my queen. Is it enough? Let's keep going. Knight of 6. You want to take? Not too worried about that. What's the weakness in the position? Was I in the trading business? Not so much. So let's keep that rook, and we're bothering c7. Takes. Now rook b7. I just want to pile up on the weakness. And in the meantime, my opponent isn't breaking through on the king side. I've got time. So if I can break through faster, I just win. So e4, oh, you're bothering my rook. That's a good way to try to win it. Cheapos. So none of that, sir. Rook c8. Now how can we get that rook out of there or apply more pressure? Well, we got a bishop not doing anything. Let's keep it going. e3. Now, what's the best way to defensively handle this? This is a good practical move. Well, if you take, it's going to open up an avenue, and the king's being checked immediately. I want to try to lock it down. So f3. Not f4, just f3. Now on h4, okay, we ask the question again. What's the best way to try to stop as much counterplay as possible? Well, I'm going to go king g2 because if they take, my king is covering this now freshly minted g3 pawn, which is kind of weak. Now queen g5. All right. I don't like the potential of f4, g4, queen h4, where a perpetual looks very, very possible there. So in order to stop black from playing f4, what do? We play f4 ourselves. And now on queen f6, I see nothing that is going to bother me too much, no immediate threat. So I have time to take the pawn. What should I take with? If you take with the rook, we're going to be trading down. I love my rook battery. I just want to get rid of this pawn so the rooks can really exert more pressure. So we're going to take with the bishop. And after queen c3, you still need some time. So let's move the bishop out of the way. And on queen d2, you're hitting my e-pawn. Okay. Simple one-move threats have one-move defenses. And on queen e1, you just have to eyeball that black has a single check here on f2. What's the follow-up after that, if it was black's move? Queen f2, king h3, queen f1, bishop f1. Where's your checks? Takes. My opponent went g5. Now, solve for mate. There's a few of them. Rook h7. Bishop d5. Wanted to get every piece working. I felt that was more aesthetically pleasing. Hopefully you enjoyed this game. In some future videos coming up, I'm going to be taking a look at some ideas from chessable courses, and I've got some new stuff coming out that I'd like to share with you guys.